Before we enter the psychological depth of the handless maiden, it matters to understand where this story comes from and why it has survived. This tale was collected and preserved by the Brothers Grimm in the early 19th century, not as a piece of entertainment, but as part of a much older oral tradition. Long before it was written down, this story lived in the voices of people who had no psychology textbooks, no trauma theory, and no clinical language. What they had was image, symbol, and story. Fairy tales like this one were never meant to teach morality in a simple way. They were meant to carry psychological truth across generations. They speak in images because the unconscious does not think in concepts. It thinks in pictures that disturb, haunt, and stay alive long after the story ends. This is why, when Carl Jung turned his attention to fairy tales, he did not treat them as fantasies or cultural curiosities. He understood them as spontaneous expressions of the collective psyche, maps of inner processes that repeat wherever human beings struggle with loss, fear, authority, and transformation. Later, analysts like Marie-Louise von Franz would go even deeper, showing how fairy tales describe psychological development in its most stripped-down archetypal form. Unlike myths, fairy tales rarely involve gods or heroes of grand stature. Their figures are often ordinary: a miller, a daughter, a king, a child lost in the woods. This simplicity is not accidental. It allows the story to bypass the intellect and speak directly to inner experience, especially experiences that are too early, too painful, or too wordless to be remembered consciously. The Handless Maiden belongs to a group of tales that deal with psychological injury at its origin. Not the trauma of the outside world, but the trauma that arises within the structures meant to protect and guide the developing soul. These stories are difficult because they refuse to idealize family, authority, or morality. They tell the truth symbolically, without apology. This introduction is not meant to explain the story away. It is meant to prepare you to listen differently, because what follows is not a lesson. It is a mirror. And like all true mirrors of the psyche, it shows us something we did not choose but must eventually face. There is a moment in this story that is almost unbearable to look at. A young woman stands before the world without hands, not wounded in battle, not punished by strangers, but mutilated by her own father. Fairy tales do not soften this image. They present it plainly, because the psyche does not whisper when something essential is broken. It shows us the truth in symbols that hurt to see. Hands are not just tools. They are how we reach, how we shape, how we say yes or no to life. To lose them is to lose agency itself. Psychologically, this is not about physical violence alone. It is about the moment when a young soul learns that its own will is dangerous, unwanted, or costly. When the natural impulse to act, to choose, to move toward life is severed at the root. The father here represents authority, order, law, and protection. When that figure becomes the source of harm, something fundamental collapses inside the psyche. This is how trauma often begins. Not with chaos, but with betrayal. The handless maiden does not scream. She does not rebel. She does not fight back. That silence matters. Trauma rarely announces itself with drama. More often, it enters quietly, teaching the psyche a devastating lesson. Do not reach. Do not want. Do not act. And so the hands fall away. In adult life, this loss shows up subtly, in the inability to make decisions, in chronic self-doubt, in a strange numbness toward desire, in the feeling of watching life happen from a distance, as if participation itself were dangerous. I don't know what I want. I feel disconnected. I can't move forward. These are modern echoes of an ancient image. The maiden does not become evil. She does not become bitter. Instead, she becomes emptied, stripped of initiative, carried by circumstances rather than shaping them. This is the quiet tragedy of early psychological injury. The personality survives, but the sense of inner power goes underground. What makes this story unsettling is that the injury comes from within the family structure, The psyche is wounded before it has fully formed its defenses. The cut happens too early, before language, before choice, before resistance. And yet the tale does not end here. It pauses. This chapter is not about healing, not yet. It is about naming the loss, about honoring the reality that something essential was taken, and that pretending otherwise only deepens the wound. The Handless Maiden shows us a truth we rarely allow ourselves to face. Sometimes our power was not lost because we were weak, but because we were unprotected. And the question the story leaves us with is not hopeful or comforting. It is honest. Where in your life did you learn that reaching was unsafe? And what part of you has been waiting silently, without hands, ever since? The most disturbing moment in The Handless Maiden is not the loss of the hands themselves. It is who causes it, the father. In fairy tales, the father is not merely a personal figure. He represents structure, law, protection, and the principle that mediates the child's relationship with the world. He is meant to stand between the vulnerable psyche and forces it cannot yet face. When this figure fails, the injury cuts deeper than pain. It destabilizes meaning itself. This is why this chapter is called When Protection Becomes Betrayal. From a Jungian perspective, betrayal by authority is not just emotional, it is archetypal. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche organizes itself around trust in inner and outer structures. When those structures turn against the developing soul, the damage is not limited to memory. It alters the relationship to action, confidence, and reality. The father in this tale does not act out of sadism. He acts out of fear, weakness, and unconscious submission to darker forces. This matters. Trauma is rarely inflicted by monsters who know exactly what they are doing. More often, it is delivered by ordinary people who fail to protect because they themselves are unintegrated, frightened, or morally collapsed. For the child, however, intention is irrelevant. What the psyche registers is this: the place where safety should exist is dangerous. This creates a specific kind of psychological wound. Not the wound of chaos, but the wound of inverted order. The rules no longer make sense. Obedience does not lead to safety. Trust does not protect. And so the psyche adapts in the only way it can, by withdrawing its own initiative. Better not to reach, better not to want, better not to act. This is how inner paralysis is born. Adults who carry this pattern often struggle to name it. They may describe chronic hesitation, fear of visibility, or a deep suspicion of authority, both external and internal. Even their own impulses feel unsafe. Desire becomes something to suppress rather than follow. Movement feels like risk. In Jungian terms, this is where the ego loses its alliance with the self. The guiding center of the psyche goes silent, not because it has disappeared, but because it was once betrayed at the moment it needed protection most. As Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized in her work with fairy tales, early symbolic injuries do not simply heal with insight. They shape the tempo of a life. They determine when a person moves forward and when they freeze without knowing why. The Handless Maiden does not accuse her father. She does not seek revenge. The tale is not interested in blame. It is interested in consequence. And the consequence is this: when protection becomes betrayal, the soul learns to survive by disappearing from its own hands. The question this chapter leaves us with is quiet, but unsettling. What part of your inner authority was shaped by fear rather than trust? And how much of your hesitation is not weakness, but an ancient loyalty to a time when reaching meant harm? To live without hands is to remain alive while being unable to participate. This is the psychological state the fairy tale places us in next. The injury has already happened. The betrayal has already passed. What follows is quieter, heavier, and far more familiar to adult life. The Handless Maiden does not die. She walks, she eats, she exists, but she cannot touch, hold, choose, or shape. In symbolic language, hands are the organs of relationship between inner intention and outer reality. They translate desire into action. To lose them is not simply to suffer, It is to become disconnected from one's own capacity to influence life. This is the psychology of disconnection. After trauma, the psyche often adapts by pulling energy inward, not as a choice, but as a survival response. Action feels dangerous, expression feels costly, initiative feels exposed. So the system learns a different rule: stay still and stay safe. From the outside, this can look like passivity or resignation. From the inside, it feels like numbness, a sense that life is happening somewhere else, to someone else. People in this state often say things like, "I feel detached. I'm here, but not fully. I don't feel like myself anymore." These are not metaphors. They are accurate descriptions of a psyche that has lost access to its hands. In Jungian psychology, disconnection is not the absence of life energy. It is life energy that has withdrawn from consciousness. As Marie-Louise von Franz often pointed out, fairy tales show us what happens after the catastrophe, when the soul must live with the consequences long before transformation becomes possible. The maiden does not rush to recover what was lost. She does not work through her trauma. The story does not offer techniques, affirmations, or explanations. Instead, it shows a long psychological winter where the personality survives without agency. This matters because modern culture is uncomfortable with this phase. We rush toward healing, empowerment, and meaning. But the psyche has its own timing. There is a necessary period where the self cannot act, not because it refuses to, but because it cannot yet risk movement. Life without hands is life lived defensively. Decisions are postponed. Desires are muted. Relationships feel distant. Even joy can feel suspicious, as if touching it might cost something again. Yet this stage is not pathological. It is adaptive. The tale honors this condition by not judging it. The handless maiden is not shamed for her limitation. She is not told to overcome it. She is simply allowed to exist in a reduced state, protected by distance and silence. This chapter asks us to reconsider something deeply uncomfortable. What if your disconnection was not failure, but wisdom? What if the numbness, the hesitation, the emotional distance were not flaws to eliminate, but signs that your psyche once learned survival by letting go of its hands? And if that is true, the question is no longer how to force movement, but how to listen for the moment when movement can safely return. After the loss of her hands, the maiden does not remain in her father's house. She leaves. This departure is not dramatic. There is no confrontation, no justice, no repair. The story moves her away from the place of injury and into exile. Symbolically, this is one of the most important moments in the entire tale. Exile is not punishment here, it is necessity. In Jungian psychology, exile represents a withdrawal of the psyche from a world that can no longer be trusted. When the outer environment becomes unsafe, the soul seeks distance, not to escape life, but to preserve what little integrity remains. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche will sacrifice participation before it sacrifices survival. The long silence that follows is not empty. It is protective. In exile, the maiden enters a liminal state. She is no longer embedded in the familiar structures of family, authority, or expectation. Yet she has not entered a new identity either. This in-between condition mirrors a psychological reality many adults recognize but rarely name: the period after trauma when the old life no longer fits and the new life has not yet appeared. This silence can feel terrifying. Without hands, without voice, without direction, the personality exists in suspension. Time stretches, meaning thins. The question, "Who am I now?" has no answer, and so the psyche does the only thing it can do: it waits. Modern culture treats waiting as failure, silence as stagnation, withdrawal as weakness. But fairy tales know better. They show us that deep transformation does not begin with action. It begins with containment. As Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized, the unconscious cannot be commanded. It reorganizes itself in darkness, beyond the reach of conscious will. Exile creates the conditions for this hidden work to take place. During this phase, the ego learns restraint, not because it has matured, but because it has been humbled. The drive to control, fix, or understand collapses. In its place emerges something quieter: endurance. This is the long silence, a psychological winter where nothing seems to move, yet something essential is being preserved beneath the surface. The maiden survives not by strength, but by non-interference. She does not interfere with her own healing by forcing it. For many adults, this stage appears as depression, loss of direction, or a feeling of being off the path. Careers pause. Relationships dissolve. Old ambitions lose their meaning. There is grief without language, stillness without reassurance. And yet, this silence is not the end of life. It is life stripped to its minimum: breath, presence, time. The fairy tale does not hurry her out of exile. It honors the duration. It allows the soul to remain hidden until it is ready to re-enter the world differently. The question this chapter leaves lingering is unsettling, but necessary. What if the silence you fear is not emptiness, but incubation? And what part of you is still in exile, not because it is lost, but because it is not yet safe to return? Something begins to change, but so slowly it is almost imperceptible. The fairy tale does not announce this moment with triumph. There is no revelation, no decision, no sudden insight. The handless maiden does not wake up one day, ready to reclaim her life. Instead, movement returns the way dawn arrives, quietly, without asking permission. This is crucial. Inner movement does not return through effort. It returns when the psyche senses that the danger has passed. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the frozen energy of the psyche begins to thaw. As Carl Jung understood, healing does not occur because the ego wills it. It occurs because the deeper organizing center of the psyche, the self, resumes its regulating function once conditions are safe enough. Notice what does not happen. The maiden does not regain her hands first. She does not reclaim power and then re-enter life. Instead, life begins to move before power returns. Relationship appears. Meaning re-emerges. The world approaches her gently, without demand. Psychologically, this reverses a common modern fantasy, that we must become strong before we can live again. Fairy tales suggest the opposite. We live again so that strength can slowly return. This stage is marked by small, almost fragile signs of motion, a sense of curiosity, a willingness to remain present a little longer, a feeling that not everything is dangerous anymore. These shifts are not dramatic enough to inspire confidence, but they are real. For adults who have lived for years in disconnection, this phase can feel confusing. Movement returns, but trust does not. Desire flickers, but fear still lingers. The personality is cautious, uncertain whether life is once again safe to touch. This caution is not resistance, it is intelligence. As Marie-Louise von Franz often emphasized, fairy tales honor the tempo of the psyche. They show that the unconscious restores vitality gradually, testing reality before committing fully. The soul does not rush back into what once wounded it. The return of inner movement is therefore relational, not heroic. It depends on the presence of something or someone that does not demand performance, productivity, or proof of wholeness. The psyche begins to move when it no longer has to defend itself. Importantly, the maiden does not interpret this movement as healing. She does not name it. She simply lives into it, one step at a time. This protects the process from the ego's impatience. In modern life, this stage might look like choosing connection over isolation, without knowing why. Taking a small risk that feels tolerable. Allowing interest to exist without acting on it. Letting time pass without self-condemnation. The fairy tale suggests that this is how agency is reborn, not as force, but as responsiveness. The question this chapter leaves us with is subtle but deeply revealing. Where in your life has movement already begun, quietly, without your permission? And what would happen if you stopped demanding certainty and allowed that movement to find its own hands in time? The return of the hands is not a miracle, it is a consequence. This is one of the most misunderstood moments in the handless maiden. From the outside, it looks like restoration. What was lost is given back. But psychologically, nothing simply returns to its original state. What grows back is not innocence, it is strength shaped by survival. The fairy tale is precise here. The hands do not reappear because the maiden proves herself worthy. They do not come back through effort, repentance, or forgiveness. They grow when the inner conditions have changed, when movement, relationship, and time have done their quiet work. In Jungian psychology, this reflects the difference between ego strength and psychic integrity. As Carl Jung observed, the self does not restore what was lost by returning us to who we were. It transforms loss into structure. What emerges is more grounded, more conscious, and less naive. These new hands carry memory. They know what it means to be cut off from agency. They know what it costs to act without protection. And because of that, they move differently. They do not reach blindly. They do not obey automatically. They do not confuse authority with safety. This is a different kind of strength. It is not loud. It is not aggressive. It does not seek validation. It is the strength of someone who can act and withdraw, who can choose and wait, who knows when not to reach. Many adults struggle with this stage because it does not resemble the strength our culture celebrates. There is no sense of domination, certainty, or control. Instead, there is discernment, boundaries, a quiet authority that does not need to prove itself. As Marie-Louise von Franz often emphasized, fairy tales show individuation not as triumph, but as alignment. The psyche becomes whole not by erasing its wounds, but by integrating them into how it lives and chooses. The regrown hands symbolize agency that has passed through trauma and survived it. This agency is slower, more selective, more attuned to inner signals. It is no longer borrowed from external rules or parental voices. It belongs to the individual. Importantly, the story does not suggest that the past injury disappears. The father's betrayal is not undone. The exile is not forgotten. What changes is the relationship to power. The maiden no longer needs permission to act. But she no longer acts without listening. In adult life, this stage often appears quietly. A refusal to repeat old patterns. A calm no where there was once fear. A capacity to take responsibility without self-betrayal. The ability to hold one's life with both firmness and care. The fairy tale closes not with celebration, but with stability. Life continues, not perfectly, but truthfully. And the final question it leaves us with is not about healing, but about embodiment. How do you use your strength now? And are the hands you are living with shaped by fear or by the wisdom of what you have survived? Before we end, I want to leave you with a question that may stay with you longer than this video itself. As you listen to this story, did you notice where it touched something personal? I'm not asking where you were hurt, but where you stopped reaching. Where you learned, quietly, that your own movement might cost too much. I wonder how many of the limits you live with today are not choices you made as an adult, but loyalties you carry to an earlier moment when your inner power had to disappear in order to survive. And I can't help but ask, if your strength has returned, even partially, are you still living as if your hands were gone? If this reflection resonated with you, I invite you to stay connected to the channel. Subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections often become part of the ongoing conversation here. New videos will continue exploring fairy tales as maps of the adult soul, where psychology, myth, and lived experience meet. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care of what is quietly growing inside you, and I'll see you in the next story.